with Faraz Shaukutali.
And a very good morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And this morning is the Posun Aloka Posun Puja Day, Posun Day. And it is also International Oceans Day. And we have as a guest this morning a marine biologist with us on our set to talk about the importance of maintaining a clean ocean. But in the meantime, before we start on that theme, the newspapers are this morning reporting that Rathanasera says that his dreams are shattered. The lead story in the Daily Mirror is that the CEO of Perpetual Treasuries was removed from the Bond Commission, and there was some confusion and consternation that the CEO was present there, whereas evidence was being given about a conversation that took place between him and an official of the central bank during those heady days of trouble in the bond scam. And so we have the information, news story that new ministry secretaries have been appointed, and also that the levy is down on imported fish and up on sugar. Once this is all happening, Qatar Airways says that operations are normal and there's no need to worry about what's going on over there. But in the meantime, it is, of course, International Oceans Day, and our guest this morning is Mr. Daniel Fernando, who is a marine biologist. And we have a little clip to play for you here. So, Mr. Fernando, if the oceans are not looked after, we stand a very good chance, a good possibility that those beautiful shots that we see of our ocean, of marine life, and so on, will be lost forever.
Yes, unfortunately that is indeed the case.
Right.
We have to remember that our oceans are about 71% of our entire planet surface area, so it's actually a very significant proportion when you compare it to the land area.
Right.
But unfortunately our oceans are in big trouble.
Right.
They are getting heavily polluted. There are lots of other impacts such as overfishing, and all of this is very detrimental to our oceans, and if we don't do something about it soon, they will suffer in a big way. And it won't just be the animals within it, it'll be the humans that depend on the oceans as well that will suffer.
And of course, the Oceans Summit is now taking place. That's in the United States, isn't it?
Yeah, so the UN Oceans meeting is currently taking place in New York, and
Right.
it's attended by most of the countries in the world, including Sri Lanka, who has a delegation there headed by the Prime Minister.
Yes. It was quite strange things happen, isn't it? The Prime Minister was on a private visit trying to get his health seen to, and now that he got cleared and he's gone, very fortunate that the Ocean Summit was going on, because I suppose very important that a person of the stature of the Prime Minister of our country represents us over there.
Yes, it's definitely very encouraging that he has decided to attend this meeting, because it shows that Sri Lanka is definitely concerned about the oceans and hopefully will put forward more commitments to protecting our waters.
And in a week in which President Donald Trump says that the US is getting out of the Paris Agreement, Sri Lanka is saying we're in.
Yes, I think that's excellent news. I mean, it's no doubt that the US pulling out of the Paris Agreement is going to cause issues on a global scale, because the US is, of course, one of the largest countries in the world and one of the most powerful players in this field. But it's also very encouraging to see that other countries are still fully committed to this agreement. We have seen countries like the European Union and China pulling up the slack and basically saying that they will compensate for the US going out of the agreement. And I think it's vital that countries like Sri Lanka still stay fully committed to this, because it is important that we stay committed and make a change, because climate change is happening. There's no denying that.
There's no denying. However much we don't talk about it, it's still there.
It's still there. It's not going to go away until we do something about it.
You could be talking about corruption as well, but anyway, that's corruption, another topic. But tell me, Daniel, how does plastic end up on our beaches?
So plastic is a massive issue for our oceans, not just in Sri Lanka but all across the world. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka is actually one of the largest marine plastic polluters in the world. So recent studies have shown that Sri Lanka might actually be the 5th largest plastic polluter.
Really?
And this is terrible, because we are a very small island nation. We have a population of only about 20 million. A lot of the other countries that are on the list above us are China, Philippines, Indonesia, all of whom have populations far larger than we do. But this just shows that we are polluting to such a large extent. And a lot of this is due to the fact that we are using plastics that are not recyclable, or we are using plastics that are not being recycled properly. So it's an issue from both sides.
But what does that indicate? Does it indicate that Sri Lanka isn't doing its disposal properly, or that there are no facilities or insufficient facilities to do this? Or does it mean that we are actually just using far more plastic than these other countries that you've just mentioned in the region?
Unfortunately, it's probably a bit of all of that together. So waste management is definitely a massive issue, and we have seen that recently, unfortunately, with the disaster that took place with the garbage dump collapsing. So this just goes to show that our recycling is very inefficient in our country. Unfortunately, we of course do use a lot of plastic as well. So this is very evident, you know, every time you go shopping, the amount of polythene plastic bags that you receive. Every time you go out to eat somewhere at a local shop, you get lunch sheets, and even when we take away food, we get lunch sheets, you know, wrapped in plastic and even more plastic. And unfortunately, a lot of this plastic is just not being recycled. It's single-use plastic, which is bad news. Discarded. Exactly, it gets discarded instantly, and a lot of this unfortunately ends up in our oceans.
From a cost perspective, how much more would the same lunch sheet cost if it was more biodegradable?
It will definitely add some cost to it. So it's not as cheap as plastic, which is why a lot of people use plastic. And we see this being an issue. For example, when you look at small shops, when you go to eat, The single-use lunch sheets have become so common just because people are not willing to spend the time to wash the plates afterwards. So it's a lot easier for them to use a single sheet, a lunch sheet, and just discard that.
Sometimes they'd argue that it's more hygienic because in the smaller shops you may not necessarily have running water, and so they may be using stored water in tubs or whatever it is and that the washing of a plate may not be done properly, and so the lunch sheet, this plastic sheet, is better in terms of that. And then of course we have this today's possum poya, and we have all the dunsos, and plastic sheets we use everywhere.
Yes, unfortunately that is true, but if hygiene is something that we are concerned about, we should probably be also concerned about the food that they are making and that we are consuming, because obviously they need to wash the produce as well.
Yes.
So that is something that we should be concerned about in that case. But I also think that it goes beyond just these small shops, because we are talking about also large restaurants. Even within Colombo itself, every time you do a takeaway, it comes in plastic, which is unnecessary, particularly for larger restaurants and hotel chains. Mm-hmm. And then it's a lot of other issues, going beyond lunch sheets. We can think about, for example, plastic bottles.
Right.
That itself is an issue. Every time we go out, we are drinking water from a plastic bottle. Now, when you look at, about 10 or 15 years ago, how many people actually bought a plastic water bottle? And now it's just commonplace.
The level of awareness of the extent of the problem and the extent of what our commitment should be, how well known is it? How many people in Sri Lanka know that today is International Oceans Day? What is Sri Lanka as a country doing? We are an island nation after all. What are we doing about it today?
Unfortunately, very little is being done.
So today there's no big tamasha somewhere? No clean up on the beach?
None that I'm aware of. There is a beach cleanup taking place, I believe, in a week's time on Mount Lavinia Beach.
Okay.
But again, unfortunately, a lot of these beach cleanups just target the most popular beaches, and in Sri Lanka it usually tends to be the Mount Lavinia Beach. But if you go just outside these popular areas, there is an incredible amount of plastic on the beaches, like in Handala, for example, just outside Colombo.
In Handala, right.
Yeah.
So perhaps we ought to urge the people of Handala to organize themselves and to protect their environment. It is their environment that we talk about, aren't we?
Exactly, and that's what we have to realize. All of this comes back to us at the end of the day. All this pollution in our oceans will end up on our plates, because we are reliant on the oceans not just for the seafood that we income, but for a lot of the livelihoods. So over 200,000 people in Sri Lanka are fishermen, and they depend on the oceans for their survival. And on top of that, there are so many other communities, of course, when it goes down to all the markets selling fish and all that. And unfortunately, all this plastic pollution in the ocean will have a detrimental impact on these species as well.
And apart from it's 200,000 people, you say, are dependent on fishing, and so the fishing community. But on top of all that, you get illegal fishing from our big neighbors from India, and coming and stealing, poaching our fish.
That is definitely an issue, and unfortunately what we have seen is that India commercialized their fisheries long before Sri Lanka did. So unfortunately they have already fished out most of their waters, which is why they're encroaching on neighboring countries as well. One of the fishing techniques that they use is called bottom trawling, and it's very detrimental to the ocean's health, because it's basically this heavy metal rig that gets pulled along the ocean bottom, just destroying all the habitat permanently. So this is a very big issue. Unfortunately, it's not just India that's involved in illegal fishing. Sri Lanka is involved as well. The reason Sri Lanka got blacklisted by the EU a couple of years ago for fisheries exports, one of the factors was illegal fishing in the high seas and in other countries as well.
Yes.
So there are issues on both sides. Unfortunately, the Indian issue is very political, and
also India is big, much bigger, slightly bigger than us, aren't they?
Yes.
So I didn't see the European Union impose any conditions on the Indians, but they felt almost obliged to impose those measures against tiny Sri Lanka. Of course, Sri Lanka didn't listen to them when it came to finishing the war. We think that might have something to do with it, but then that's another story. But tell me, the Indian Ocean is the second most popular sort of affected ocean in the world in terms of pollution. Yep. The second most polluted ocean in the world. And then we have the Sri Lankan government in recent days announcing that bottom trawling is not going to be tolerated and it will attract severe penalties. Do you know what our Prime Minister has been talking about in the United States at this summit? Have you had any information about that yet?
No, I have not, but I'm hoping to hear back soon.
Yes, I'm sure his communications team will put it all out. But in the meantime, on a practical note, for example, talk about Hendela. What can, I mean, you need to provide leadership. Who is there to provide leadership in Hendela for those people to, is the ministry doing enough to gee up these people, get them going, get them out of their do-nothing seat, clean it all up, and maybe they might even develop that stretch of the beach commercially for better things than it is now, because now it's filthy.
Well, unfortunately, as is the case for a lot of things in Sri Lanka, there is limited political push from above. So a lot of environmental factors are not considered a very high priority for the government here, which hopefully will slowly change over the coming months and years, as we have seen with the Prime Minister attending the Oceans meeting in...
There was almost an accident, because he was there for medical and then this happened and he said,
yes,
well, I'm fine, so I'll go there.
Well, at least he showed up, right? So
okay.
He could have just come back without bothering. So I think that is a step in the right direction. And we have seen Sri Lanka take some positive steps when it comes to fisheries and conservation of the marine environment to some extent.
Yeah.
A lot more has to be done, of course, but there is progress being made. But, you know, looking at the plastic issue, I think it comes from both sides. I think the government definitely is responsible for a lot of this when it comes to waste management, getting big businesses more responsible for the plastic that's being manufactured. But it also falls down at the end to us as consumers. Because at the end of the day, when we go out and we take these plastic products without thinking twice about it, we are to blame as well.
So in recent weeks we saw a lot of fish being grounded. They've sort of, I don't know, the fish seem to have collectively lost their sense of direction and taken leave of their senses because they've landed on the beach, including dolphins, whales, and so on. Well, what was that all about?
So there were two issues that took place. The first was a pod of pilot whales that stranded in Sampur, just south of Trincomalee. These strandings are extremely rare in Sri Lanka, but have been documented in other parts of the world. There could be a few different causes for this, but we are uncertain as to the
Do you think this was an advanced party of whales turning up to protest against the potential effects of the Sampur power station? And they're saying, come on guys, this is an early warning thing, we don't like it, because eventually you're going to pollute the ocean, and you know we live in the ocean, so here's our advanced party.
I wish that was the case, and it would certainly send a strong message.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, probably not. But getting to that point, I think that is something we really should be discussing a lot more in this country. I mean, coal plants are definitely not clean energy, however much businesses or governments try to greenwash it. There's no such thing as clean coal. And as a country, we really should be moving forward with renewable energy. And other countries like Europe and Germany have made massive steps forward when it comes to renewable energy. I mean, Germany, I believe a few weeks ago, managed in one single day to get about 80% of its energy through renewable sources. And this is a country that has very little sunlight. Here we are the land of sunshine, Why can't we be having more solar? And it's
because somebody somewhere, Daniel, is not being allowed to make as much money, corruption. It's all down to corruption.
Yes, sadly that is the truth, and I'm not sure what we can do about that at this point. But we definitely have to put more pressure on the government as a
so
community.
from an everyday point of view, what do we do? How can we fight this menace? What should we do? Shall we organize ourselves into little groups and talk to plastics manufacturers and say, listen guys, all you big shot businessmen, you need to listen. You need to get invest some of the money you're making in R&D and get your products to be more biodegradable, and then we will sort of continue using them. Otherwise, we're going to boycott them. Is that what we should be doing?
Ideally, yes. I mean, the first thing that we should be doing is spreading awareness. More people should be aware of the issues that we are facing in this country when it comes to pollution and marine pollution. And then we should be organizing ourselves a bit better. So a lot of this comes down to NGOs getting a bit more organized amongst themselves as well, and then the environmental movement growing within our country. I think, again, we are seeing a lot more of this taking place over the last 1 or 2 years when it comes to environmental protests and all that. So there is definitely progress being made, but a lot more has to take place. And as you rightly mentioned, we should certainly be putting pressure on big businesses as well to take responsibility for the plastic that they're producing. And it can be something simple, when you consider plastic bottles, for instance, that these companies have an obligation to take those plastic bottles back and recycle them, similar to what happens with the glass bottles.
Yeah. So the glass bottles, the fizzy drinks and all that sort of thing, they do take the bottles back. And, even other matters, even alcoholic drinks, that those bottles are taken back, aren't they? So perhaps these manufacturers ought to have programs in place to collect and so on. But then again, they'll say, oh, well, your bottle of water is going to cost you, X amount more. But then that X amount more is the cost you're paying to keep our environment clean, to keep it safe.
Exactly. Recycling will not always be free. I mean, will definitely not be free, and it's definitely not going to be very cheap. But the alternative is that we completely destroy both our terrestrial and marine environments, and at the end of the day, it's going to be us who suffer. It's our people.
Does the level of plastics, let's say, pollution generated in our country, is it enough to make even a little appearance on the world radar map?
Unfortunately, yes. As I mentioned, Sri Lanka is the 5th largest marine polluter in the world.
That's just absolutely astonishing for this tiny dot of a country.
Exactly. I mean, I believe the #1 country is China, but they have a population of 1.3 billion people.
Whose statistics are these, Mr. Fernando?
This was an international study that was undertaken, and it was a paper published in the Science Journal, so it is quite highly reputed. There will, of course, be people that dispute this, and I'm not aware of the exact details behind this paper, but to be honest, whether we are in the top 5 or whether we're in the top 10 or in the top 20 is regardless, because
our appearance on the list is not good news.
Exactly. I mean, for a country of this scale to be polluting so much, and I think we don't need to be looking at any list to justify this. We can just go out and we can see this for ourselves when you look at all the plastic that's being consumed and just discarded without any thought.
So if there are more floods, it's going to be even more bad news, because all the rivers will dump even more things into the ocean.
Exactly, and it's not just plastics that become an issue, A lot of the waste that is produced on land ends up in the oceans due to rivers, and this includes a lot of other things. So one of the big issues that we have is with the excessive use of pesticides and fertilizer, for example, in our farm areas. All of this ends up in the ocean, and again, a lot of this is due to the lack of awareness and the lack of adequate enforcement to ensure that farmers are not using excessive amounts of these pesticides. And I believe there have also been some reports that show that Sri Lanka is one of the highest pesticide users in the world.
Okay.
So a lot of these pesticides, and then again chemicals from big industry that are not so well regulated, all of this ends up in our water, and eventually it makes its way down to the ocean, where it again pollutes our fish in other ways.
Do you think, in your observation of all these matters, do you think that this government has got enough money? Which is all down to that as well, isn't it? One has to juggle with all these natural calamities that have befallen us. There's the issue of finding them housing, temporary shelters. There's the war-affected. They alone need about 137,000 houses out there. So there's a lot on the plate for this government, for any government in our country.
So that's an interesting issue that you bring up when it comes to the number of people that are getting displaced by climate-related issues. A lot of this comes down to, of course, climate change as a whole, which is an issue that Sri Lanka on its own cannot tackle, of course, which is why we should be committed to agreements like the Paris Agreement. But the other issue that we have to take into consideration on a national level when it comes to these type of disasters is that it's not necessarily that we're getting a lot more rain than we used to historically. It's the fact that our natural environment has been destroyed so much that it's not able to withstand these heavy rains that are taking place. So we have destroyed the forests that are able to absorb a lot of this water. We have destroyed the wetlands around our cities that basically act, as a natural reservoir when all this water comes in. And instead we have gone, flattened them, put down concrete, and then we are wondering why we are getting flooded in. The water has nowhere to go anymore. So unfortunately, as long as we keep destroying our natural environment, any disasters that take place will be magnified.
Do you think, from a highly critical point of view, do you think that our government is showing a real watered-down commitment towards fighting this problem, because they've got other issues, and so in the pecking order of things, the environment is, whilst it's important, isn't perhaps getting as much attention as you would like?
That is definitely an issue. The environment is not getting any thought in this country. I mean, it's very limited, actually. There are, of course, other issues, but it's the same across the world. Other countries have similar problems, when it comes to other economic factors that they have to take into consideration. But unfortunately, we are living on this planet. There is no other planet that we can turn to, and if we destroy this, it's going to have an impact across the board. I mean, our economics are going to suffer. As I mentioned, fishing is contributing almost 2% of our GDP. What's going to happen to that when we run out of fish in the ocean?
And so therefore it's a good idea to keep the illegal fishermen away as well, and the poaching from India and so on.
Yes, and that comes down to implementation as well. So we unfortunately have a tendency quite often to bring in good regulations, but we lack the measures to adequately enforce them. So if we have all these measures in place and we're not enforcing them, then there's almost no point in having the measures in place. So this is also related to local factors. For example, destructive fishing techniques that we use on a national level, for example, dynamite fishing. This is still taking place on the East Coast, but there is no enforcement taking place to actually catch these people and imprison them.
Hopefully the Minister of Fisheries is listening in on this, and if he's not, we'll send him a link by 9 o'clock this morning. So when he gets back from the temple, he can watch that. But as we end this morning's program, can you tell us, Mr. Fernando, what should the people do from an individual point of view? Where can we start? What can we do? What's the message to the people? What can we do?
It's very simple. When you go out shopping, make sure that you're not taking as many plastic bags as they offer. It's very simple steps. Take a reusable bag with you when you go. You can easily carry this around in your bag, and every time you get to the checkout counter or in your local shop, just tell them to put all your groceries and shopping into this bag. So refuse plastic bags. This is also a big issue, for example, when you go to the vegetable counters where they try to pack each individual vegetable in a different plastic bag. Refuse single-use plastic. So this can be lunch sheets that are being given with your takeaway food or at small shops. It can be plastic cutlery, plastic cups. And also, the next time you go to drink some water, make it a point to try and ask for filtered water. Or, for example, in cities like Colombo, where the tap water is actually usually quite good for drinking, request tap water instead of getting a plastic bottle. And when you're getting these plastic bottles, do try and make sure that they're disposed of properly. And this is something, again, we really should be doing. When you travel around the country, we're just discarding our plastic everywhere. So these are small steps that we can take as individuals.
But small steps that will make a giant contribution to the betterment of mankind.
Exactly. I mean, we are a population of 20 million. Imagine if every one of us decides not to take one plastic bag, just one plastic bag every day. That's 20 million plastic bags. And we're getting a lot more than one plastic bag every single day.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for being on Newsline. We do appreciate your presence. And on International Oceans Day. Thank you very much. And that's the way it is from Newsline this morning. And we'll see you same time, same place tomorrow morning. And on the 8th of June 2017, it's goodbye from Newsline. Take care. God bless.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.